This podcast is brought to you by the shop at artificery.com. Visit the shop at artificery.com for Star Wars Destiny boosters, subscriptions, and singles, as well as other great curated tabletop games such as X-Wing, Dragonfire, and now Keyforge and Transformers CCG. Find out more at artificery.com.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Artificery Cast. I am Hexen, and joined me today is XeroHour and Lasci.
Yo, what's up?
And on today's episode, we will be going over the past GenCon with the top two decks covering Mama Commandos and the 3-wide Hero Mill.
Also known as Annie Mill, which I've been very severely told Annie is spelled A-N-I, not Annie like the League of Legends character A-N-N-I-E. I will abstain from misspelling his awful nickname in future articles or mentions.
Like, there's a reason he killed all the younglings.
Yeah, he was angry that the prequels were so bad.
I mean, can you blame him?
Nope.
No, I've seen those movies a lot.
His pod racer is quite the menace here.
Yeah, it is. The prequels just won't go away, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, but we're not here to talk about our movies. We're here to talk about our card game. And so this past Gen Con was quite a shakeup with the top 8. What was it? It was like an even split between villains and heroes.
Yeah, it was exclusively there was a lot of mill going on there, and hats off to the Hyperloops for bringing that deck and just smashing with it, because it was very efficient. I know I personally got to play one game against it, and even knowing kind of like the tricks behind the deck, because I had talked to Reflex and Bobby and a bunch of other people in between rounds, just talking about how well the deck was performing. Even knowing kind of what it was trying to do, it didn't go very well. There was a lot of problems on my side of the battlefield, and things just didn't really go my way. I think I played an upgrade on round 3, and it was a hard cast Force Lightning, so very hard to come back from stuff like that. But I definitely think we should start with this mill deck and kind of just how efficient and excellent it is.
Definitely. So for those of you who don't know, the general lineup is Elite Yoda, Cassian, and Yellow Anakin Skywalker.
It's super efficient. I mean, it's very consistent. I brought a little bit different version than a lot of their lists. There's only so much you can be different in that list. But I brought that it was a 31-person store championship this past weekend, and took it to the finals. And it's tough to beat if it gets rolling early.
Yeah, it's pretty brutally efficient. For anybody who's like been living in a cave and doesn't really know what this does, essentially it runs a lot like Yoda Cassian, which is a very similar mill deck. It's just trying to use Yoda to get a lot of resource efficiency and make sure that you're resolving all the dice that you want to every turn. The real big kind of interaction that the deck has is running Anakin's Pod Racer with Anakin and basically getting the free 2 discard, one from the opponent, from 2 discard from the opponent's hand by flipping the Pod Racer to a discard side, or you could flip the Pod Racer to a 2 shield side, and that's super efficient for keeping your characters alive. And on top of that, it just runs a fistful of removal and a lot of just really efficient cards. On top of the fact that Yoda just makes tons of resources, and you play Second Chance and Force Illusion and basically just tell your opponent to good luck getting through all of your health.
Yeah, I mean, I played against it in one of the store champs I went to in the finals. And that was where I got my first taste of that deck with a vehicle deck, and that was pretty much felt like an auto loss there. Like that deck is just... So what makes it better than just Elite Yoda, Elite Cassian is the fact that you're getting a third character and you're wider on health.
It's 7 extra health. It's a third character, so if you want to run flank, you can. I know personally my version didn't. It's probably something I should have included in it. And just the Pod Racer and the Anakin combo is just rough. I mean, it is insanely consistent if you get it out early.
Yeah, like the turn 1 Anakin's Pod Racer is super oppressive. It makes it really hard to kind of outpace your opponent. And on top of that, especially once you get the pod racer down, it just tends to run a little bit better than the Yoda Cassian, just because you're essentially getting Cassian's die off of the pod racer, and you're ensuring that is always going to hit a side that you really want to resolve. So it's just really scary. And like removal cards like Beguile and Entangle, that are just really efficient and really easy to use, especially when you're taking all the resources with Yoda. It just makes things super quick and just really dirty. Like it wins round 3, 4 pretty consistently. And on top of that, it's constantly getting rid of all of your aggro stuff and all of your cards. And just it's really hard to play against.
I think this version's also better because it opens up stuff like Into the Garbage Chute, which you can't really run in just Yoda Cassian because you can't not get one of those dice in the pool in that deck.
Into the Garbage Chute, actually, I would argue is probably one of the like last 4 cards, because you really want to resolve over your character dice, right? Like Anakin needs to get rolled in if you have a pod racer out.
Yeah.
And Cassian has so much value off of his die as well.
Yeah, I only run 1 in my deck.
Yeah. It's
definitely pretty nasty. Then like its primary upgrade is what, Force Meditation?
Yeah, it runs Force Meditation and it runs Maz's Goggles, and then I think it's just Second Chance and Force Illusion as well.
Mine runs Bartering as well.
Oh, yeah. Bartering is definitely another one.
I think that was in the GenCon lists as well.
Mm-hmm. It definitely was. I think that like part of the reason why the deck is so brutally efficient is that we are, especially nowadays, definitely getting towards the point where I think we're in a metagame where there are a lot of 3-wide lists because everybody wants a lot of hit points, and those 3-wide lists typically have around 30 health. So while you're not necessarily killing characters and having that progression, you are trying to hit the same amount of health as other people are, and you're doing it a lot more efficiently with your cards and your removal, because a lot of decks have a lot of cards that are geared towards dealing with aggro matchups, whereas they, especially at GenCon, they weren't necessarily running cards that dealt well with the mill matchups. So I definitely think that that's one of the reasons that it really succeeded at GenCon.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
on
it's
top of that,
definitely a scary deck. But so what are answers that we see are ways to tackle this deck? Because it made, what was it, 3 copies of this list made it into Gen Con in the top cut.
When I saw that top cut, I was playing this deck for a couple days before Gen Con. I started messing around with it, and then I saw how well it did, and I was really upset because I knew people were gonna prepare for it at the store championship I was going to this past weekend, and they did. I mean, there's only so much you could do to prepare for it, I think, but they did.
So what are those answers and preparations for this deck then?
I mean, I think Talzin and the Commandos, the other finalist at Gen Con, is a really good matchup against it.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you sit down and you watch that final match, that's, I think it was Team Covenant streamed, you can definitely see that if Fatigue wasn't taking over the Mandos player, I think he definitely had a really good chance of winning. Excuse me, I have hiccups. I think he had a really good chance of winning Gen Con. There were some mistakes that were made, and obviously, like, playing for 1 billion hours over the course of 2 days is super stressful and tiring. But that deck is pretty efficient, and it really helps that it kind of explodes out with holocrons and chance cubes and uses those 0 cost upgrades to do free damage every round, which is like absolutely imperative when you're playing against a deck that runs such efficient and good removal.
So let's talk about that then, the other deck. So Mama Commandos. So I think a lot of us kind of figured that the Commando was probably one of the more efficient non-unique characters that we've seen in a while, because auto damage in itself is just such a strong ability.
I was really excited about it for trilogies. And I actually haven't played like literally any trilogies since Way of the Force came out. But like that was definitely a character that I wanted to explore with trilogies, because I like the Grio's Girls list so much, and it felt like Mando just added so much more efficiency onto what that deck was already doing. But I wasn't really convinced about it being able to keep up in standard until one of our community members, the USS Gordon Captain, ran it against me like in a gauntlet over one night, and I was like, wow, this this list is fun. It's cool. He was playing like a really old version of the list that used a lot of one cost upgrades, like really bad one cost upgrades, like hunting rifle, DH-17, crystal ball, and like the really really bad new Talzin type upgrade, the like orb or whatever the hell that thing is.
The sphere.
Yeah, sphere. But that deck I don't think was as good, but it definitely like set this seed that was like, ooh, this is interesting. This is fun. This is very efficient.
It's a fun deck. I haven't actually played with it yet, but I played against it in top 4 in the first top 4 match, and I won both of those games. But they're some of the most stressful games I've ever played. Mm-hmm. Just because it's you play the chance cube and then you activate and you bounce it back, then you play it on the other one, and then you just do that every turn. And against Mill, it's really good because everyone that's playing that deck's running the Mandalorian vamp races, so it gives you more turns to keep surviving.
Yeah,
I think I actually think the vamp braces, whatever the hell they're called, and the chance cubes, they maybe sometimes buy you one churn if it's really close. I don't think it's as good at buying more than one churn. But I think it's definitely possible. Like, it's definitely something to keep an eye out when you're playing against Mill, like whether or not you can pull those back into your hand and keep them from killing you for a turn. But it's usually super, super close. And most of the time, I think, like, if I start a round and if I have less than 5 cards, I generally feel like my opponent is going to be able to mill me out, even if I take those back to my hand. So it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't, unfortunately.
Definitely. I mean, like, I haven't personally seen like that deck in action, but yeah, I think that also gives it legs, is on top of that auto damage. Like, just being able to buy yourself one extra turn can make the difference.
It can. And I mean, sometimes the vamp races kind of get you in trouble. Just to share more of the game I played, I was down to 1 card in my hand. I had about 5 or 6 cards in my deck. There was a hyperspace was in there somewhere, but I had flames in my hand. And so I had a discard side showing, and he had 2 vamp races. So I just passed until he bounced 1. I discarded it, and then he pulled the other one back, and then he played it with the power action, and I flames it for the win. So, I think sometimes it can get you in trouble if you're looking for that power action with it, if you know your matchup,
Of course. That's always more of a, I think, edge case there.
Yeah, definitely.
But overall, so another thing we've seen at GenCon is that out of the top 16 decks, I think all but 1 decks were playing blue.
Yep. The only deck that wasn't playing blue was Texter's Wedge Vehicles deck. And yeah, it is a scary time in Destiny right now. Like, that blue's just so good. There's so much to like in blue. All the blue characters are super efficient. I just wrote an article that just basically says the TLDR at the very beginning is, like, if you're not playing Snoke, Talzin, or Yoda, you ought to be doing something incredibly interesting and unique, or you're just playing behind the curve, essentially, because those characters are all blue and they're all really good and really efficient.
On top of getting cards like Beguile and Force Illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the 2 best upgrades in the game are probably blue, right? It's Force Illusion and Force Speed.
I would argue that Force Speed maybe isn't even like that good.
Force Speed I'd be more hyped more lately.
Yeah, I'd be more hyped about like Holocron and Villain. I think that card is absolutely necessary going forward. Like, we saw a period where Holocron wasn't really being utilized at all. And now it's kind of come back with a vengeance now that there's more 3-wide lists, and now that there's a necessity for Force Wave to be used pretty frequently in matches.
Yeah.
But I mean, even besides that, like, Beguile is super efficient. Overconfidence has always been a great card. Force Illusion is pretty much amazing like all the time. In villains, like I said, Holocron and like 4 force powers is really oppressive. There's just so much to like about blue right now. And it's the characters, it's the dice, it's the events, it's the upgrades. There's just it's very hard to find efficiency outside of blue, especially if you're playing heroes, like because red is just so garbage.
Invest in Yoda
it's not
and
the most
Snoke.
garbage thing in the world.
No, man, red heroes is still like struggling. Like Rose, as good as Rose is, and as good as Crate Speeder is, like red heroes just does not have the staying power that. I mean, even red villains is kind of in like an awkward place right now. Most villain decks are if you're not running Thrawn, you're running like a Stormtrooper and 2 best defenses and 2 probes. But like Heroes doesn't have either of those things, and they have a bunch of really bad upgrades.
Yeah, I think we see that in the game where like design space wise on Red Hero, everything's pushed more towards the support end. Like I think that's always been a struggle. It's just that red upgrades have just always been suffering. But it looks like slowly they're trying to creep back up. I mean, Rex's blaster I think is a good change of direction in terms of red upgrades, but it's going to be quite a bit of catch up before we reach a point where things stabilize, and that might even be not until after rotation before we start to see a shift of the color wheel.
I mean, Red Hero does get long-term plan, so that is pretty helpful right now too, though.
Is it?
It's pretty good.
Is it?
Is it?
All right, that's a
I
good
would
point.
argue that the I mean, we tried to do the Rose double guard deck with long-term plan. That didn't. I don't feel like that quite worked out.
It's because like there was just so much. That deck felt good against a meta where there's a lot of like heavy damage decks.
Yeah.
But now we're starting to see more shift in control with like specials on force powers and mill decks, and that doesn't really quite cut it there.
Yeah, I mean, even the partisan deck, like I never liked that deck. I understand why it was successful. I get why it felt cool, but I always felt like the indirect damage that you're doing with the partisans was just not on par with what you could be doing with other character suites. And unfortunately, vehicles is just in a super awkward place. It's really hard to run vehicles right now with all the mill that's inevitably going around since GenCon.
Yeah, for sure.
I
Also,
think if you play vehicles and you have to get 2 vehicles out round 1 or turn 1, otherwise you're just going to get overwhelmed.
But
I feel like
the amount of control there is, they have to like go up against.
Yeah,
and I also feel like the big issue that vehicle sort of has is that it's super. I mean, at least from the hero's standpoint, which I think is arguably one of the more prevalent versions of vehicles outside of Thrawn. But it relies a lot on Rose, and Rose relies on getting out the Crate Speeder and getting out the Hawk. And if you don't get out the Hawk round 1, Rose is usually dead by middle of round 2 nowadays. And it's really hard to have that Hawk in your hand and just have it be like a discard, because there's absolutely no way that you can play it. And there's just at this point in time with the prevalence of holocrons, there are just better decks that rely on 2 to 4 cards being in your opening hand. I mean, even Zach, Flaccid Baron's Grand Moff Thrawn deck, like I would rather play that than rely on getting a Hawk early with Rose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously there's something to vehicles. Like Taxter is a great player on his own merit, but being able to like pull a deck like that into the top 16 shows that there was potential. But yeah, in a field where it's just an absurd amount of mill. He got knocked out by the Talisman deck, correct?
That is a great question. I think you're right. I know he lost to it in either him or Zion lost to it in Swiss pretty convincingly. It's just, Taxter's a really good player. And I think that's probably another issue with vehicles is that like, I would argue that it's probably more intensive to play. Like it's more demanding. It has a decently high ceiling, but there's a low floor. Like you have to know what you're doing when you're playing it, especially like pulling the rally aid plays. Sometimes it's not as simple as just dumping your hand and knocking out stuff. I think it's a very demanding deck to play compared to some of the like more shooty aggro decks.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, like I know that was a deck that he just picked up for the week, because that was something that me and Zion were like kind of testing around with, where it's just raw health in a world where we were seeing in the beginning of like kind of high ceiling aggro decks. It was a very good contender against those. But then the Talzin and control deck started popping up, and when you're getting wider health, it's harder for that deck to punch through sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're definitely seeing a shift in the meta where it's a lot of 3-wide characters. And as we were saying earlier, Force Wave is probably a card that people are going to be wanting to watch out for, to be able to like utilize in blue decks coming.
I would say that like the reason Vehicles was so good in Legacies and why we as a crew liked it so much was because it was able to play like the late game plan, essentially. Like it was playing against a lot of decks that had no more than about 22 health. And it was basically saying, look, dude, if you don't kill me, if you don't churn through my 26 to 29 health and over the course of 4 rounds, I just win. I just flat out win. And that's not even taken into account the fact that you could, during Legacies, just blow out your opponent even earlier than that with a pretty nutty draw. But now that everything is so wide and has so much health, it's just like that long-term plan isn't, no pun intended, isn't effective enough to burst through that health the same way that aggro decks that are hitting from the first round and doing 7+ damage can.
Yeah.
I think another big answer to Mill is probably, we've talked about it a little bit, is Cad Snoke. Cad Snoke's good. It's at least decent against anything for the most of the same reasons Sabine was. You can just knock off 5 damage before I can even do anything. You can put Anakin on the brink before I can even react to it, or discard my hand with Cad, and it's rough.
The issue that deck, I think that we saw, was that it was incredibly role dependent. Like, we're also seeing a shift in decks just being far more consistent than they've been in the past.
Oh yeah.
Like if we look,
at the store championship I went to, that's the only deck I lost to all day. Well, it was the same deck in Swiss and then in the final, and it was Cad Snoke, because he was a very good player, and he had all the answers for everything I wanted to do, and even though he was just dealing out massive damage, I still got him down to his deck was gone in every game that we played, so it was just down to whatever was in his hand. And he just pushed it through.
I think Cad Snoke is a lot, I don't know, it's a lot more roll and draw reliant than like iterations of Sabine before she got nerfed. And while like the massive 4 discard plays can be really, really good, especially against Mill, I feel like that deck is just a little bit too inconsistent to really go the distance in a large tournament, especially considering its health pool, especially considering how hard it is to come back after Cad dies, if even possible at all. I do like Snoke though. Like I think going forward, 3-wide Snoke is something that I really want to pay attention to and really want to put work into. I just don't know if it wins quite yet in Way of the Force. I think it needs different characters or new cards.
I know in my local meta, Elite Snoke and then Admiral Piet and the Rebel Trader has been pretty popular. It's a vehicle deck, but it's been a pretty popular deck here. And it's pretty tough. It's hard to beat if it gets rolling. But, Mill kind of hurts it because it's vehicles.
But I mean, Pete is bad.
Yeah, he's not great. He's okay with the Rebel. I like him with the Rebel Trader because you can focus Rebel Trader over to the focus or to the resource side and then Snoke it for your money.
If it doesn't get controlled, of course.
Yeah, I've actually been talking to Taxter about 5 dice Snoke Bazine Stormtrooper deck. For those of you who don't know, there's an Afra deck that Cuenca ran with the Hyperloops at GenCon. And it was basically, I think it was E-Snoke Afra Battle Droid. And one of the, Afra's dice is so good with Snoke. And the thing that Snoke is really good at is making kind of crappy utility dice really, really good. And Bazine has a really crappy utility die because the disrupt and the discard by themselves is really lackluster. It's one disrupt is kind of shit. And one discard is that's not really impactful. but you Snoker and you're doing 3 discard or 3 disrupt, and that screws up somebody's entire round. So I'm interested in that deck. I don't know how it wins, but I like the concept of it.
It's got to be vehicles, right? Like you have to.
Yeah, it runs vehicles.
Okay.
So before we head out, let's just quickly cover what do we think will be the biggest contenders to show up at Nova coming up at the end of the month. Obviously, we had a great showing at GenCon of like what this meta currently is, but there's still room for decks to pop up. Like if possible, do we see anything like shifting? Do we see more decks trying to answer mill decks or wider decks with Force Wave in the form of either like Snokes or Yodas, or possibly even Old Man Luke's, just trying to abuse its ability more than once around?
Oh yeah, I think I think we're gonna see a lot of Force Wave.
My prediction is that there's going to be one deck that nobody's expecting that is going to do pretty well at Nova at the end of the month. I have no idea what it is. I can't even fathom what it'll be, but I guarantee you that there's something that makes the top cut from a team or a small group that is like, oh, I didn't think about that before. Outside of that, I envision there's going to be lots of Mandos. There's going to be lots of Talzin. There's going to be lots of Snoke. And there's absolutely going to be a crap ton of Anti-Mill. And on top of that, I think we're going to see at least a little bit of Thrawn, because I actually think Thrawn does pretty well against the Anti-Mill deck, just because you say 2 and you're pretty happy with anything that you can take out of their hand. And then outside of that, bold prediction is smart people start running red.
Red.
I think Dooku and Rebel Trader is gonna come out of nowhere.
All right. Good luck with that. I also think lots of people are going to play Kylo and don't.
Kylo will never go away because he's just a check to monocolored decks.
Yeah, no, like people are going to bring Kylo, and if you're one of those people that's like, oh, I really like my Kylo Snoke deck, don't bring it. Play something else. Play something better. Play something 3-wide. Do something different. Like if you come to an event and you're running Kylo, I can probably guess what your entire list is. And it's really easy to play against. Like you roll out Kylo, and if you get two melee sides and you're playing against heroes, I'm like, yeah, easy pickings. Bye.
Stick with Kylo Price. Use the probes.
Yeah, you should be playing Kylo Price if you're playing Kylo, but don't bring Kylo. Play something interesting. Play something different. Play something that people don't expect. Play something better.
Fifth Brother and Price.
No, stop with the jank. Don't listen to ZeroHour.
Fifth Brother and Thrawn.
Yes, play Fifth Brother. Bring Fifth Brother to Nova. He's so good.
Bring Thrawn Anakin.
Seventh Sister DJ.
Oh god. But
Plo Koon and 2 Partisans.
Sounds hot.
Now
I
we're
like
just
it.
deep diving. And before we deep dive any further, I'm gonna pull the plug on this show.
That's probably for the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this has been the Artificery Cast. You can find us at our Patreon as well as our website, artificery.com, where we post articles diving into competitive play. And for future episodes, please keep in touch. We're trying this out. Hopefully we'll be able to get a weekly or bi-weekly format going. And this has been Hexen with ZeroHour and Lasci.
Woo!